One child isn't enough. My alien wife demands 10. A family legacy that can't be stopped. Ethan Parker thought his life was complicated enough. Fixing alien tech, surviving on a space station, and dealing with the constant tension between humans and Clithera. But nothing could have prepared him for Liora, his alien wife, and her shocking demand. 10 children. 10. No negotiation. In a universe where survival is a struggle and alliances are fragile, Liora's fierce determination to forge a legacy of power and strength forces Ethan to confront the unimaginable. With enemies at their doorstep and family traditions that defy human logic, Ethan must decide, can he rise to meet her challenge, or will the weight of her expectations break him? Will they survive the forces that threaten their future and their family? Or will the world they've built be torn apart by fear and hatred? One thing is certain, this legacy can't be stopped. Don't miss out on more thrilling tales of love, survival, and power in the stars. Hit that subscribe button and join our journey, only on Alien Whispers. The year was 2040, and Earth was no longer just humanity's domain. 5 years ago, the Clithera had arrived, refugees from Shattered World, their massive, gleaming ships hovering in orbit like silent promises of peace or peril. The debates had raged. Could humans share their planet with an alien species so advanced, so different? In the end, treaties were signed, borders redrawn, and the Clithera settled among them. Their glowing skin and cosmic eyes a constant reminder of the stars they'd fled. Ethan Parker didn't care much for politics. He was a spaceflight engineer, a guy who liked fixing things, not debating them. With a quick smile and a knack for cracking jokes under pressure, he'd spent the last few years working on Clithera rescue ships, earning a reputation as the human who could keep their tech humming. That's how he ended up on Station Nexus, a sprawling orbital platform where humans and Clithera collaborated, or at least pretended to. It was a routine job, a busted engine on one of their shuttles. Ethan stood in the hangar, toolbox in hand, staring at the sleek, silver craft. Its curves shimmered like liquid metal under the station's artificial lights. He ran a hand through his dark hair, muttering, "All right, let's see what's broken this time." That's when she appeared. Liora. She didn't walk into the hangar. She commanded it. A Clithera warrior, tall and fierce, she wore a fitted tunic that hugged her frame, threads of gold woven into the fabric catching the light. Her skin glowed with a soft, shifting luminescence, like a nebula trapped beneath flesh, and her hair, golden and flowing, moved as if caught in an unseen breeze. But it was her eyes that stopped Ethan cold, blazing green, alive with flecks of starlight, like they held secrets he'd never unravel. She wasn't just beautiful. She was a storm made flesh, a force he couldn't ignore. "You're the human they sent?" Her voice was smooth, edged with steel, cutting through the hum of the hangar. Ethan blinked, caught off guard, then flashed his usual grin. "That's me. Ethan Parker, engine whisperer. You must be the one in charge of this beauty." He nodded at the shuttle. Liora tilted her head, studying him. "I am Liora, commander of the Clithera Guard. This ship is vital to my people. Fix it quickly." He chuckled, setting his toolbox down. "Quick's my middle name." "Well, not really. It's James, but you get the idea." She didn't laugh, but a flicker of amusement danced in those fiery eyes. They got to work, side by side, Ethan diving into the engine's guts while Liora pointed out components he'd never seen in human tech. Their hands brushed once, twice. Accidental, fleeting, but each touch sent a jolt up his arm, like static from a live wire. He tried to focus, but her presence was a distraction he couldn't shake. Then it happened. He was crouched under the engine, wrestling with a tangled cable, when it snapped free. Ethan stumbled forward, losing his balance, and crashed into Liora. His hand landed squarely on her chest, the soft curve beneath her tunic unmistakable even through the thin armor. Time froze. His face burned red as he yanked his hand back, stammering, sorry. That was, not on purpose." Liora didn't flinch. She steadied herself, her lips curling into a sly, knowing smile. "Careful where you put those hands, human." Or do you always stumble into trouble like this? Ethan swallowed hard, heart pounding. Only when there's someone worth stumbling into, he shot back, trying to recover. Her smile widened, but she said nothing, just turned back to the ship. The air between them crackled, thick with something unspoken. They finished the repair in silence, but Ethan couldn't stop replaying that moment. The warmth under his palm, the way she hadn't pulled away. Hours later, the job was done. The shuttle hummed to life, its engines purring smoothly. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, grinning. Told you I'd fix it. Liora stepped closer, her glow casting faint shadows on his face. You're skilled, she said, her voice softer now, almost intimate. More than I expected. He raised a brow. Is that a compliment? An observation, she replied, then paused, her eyes locking onto his. Perhaps both. He laughed, a little too loud, trying to shake the heat rising in his chest. Well, I'll take it. Anything else you need fixed while I'm here? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved closer, too close, until he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. There's something I've been meaning to say, she murmured, her breath brushing his ear. Ethan froze, every nerve on edge. Yeah? What's that? Her gaze burned into his, unyielding. One child isn't enough, Ethan. I want at least 10. No negotiation. The words hit him like a meteor. He blinked, then laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Wait, what? 10? You're joking, right? But Liora didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Her expression was deadly serious, those green eyes pinning him in place. Do I look like I'm joking? She asked, her voice low and firm. Ethan's grin faded. He opened his mouth, closed it, then ran a hand through his hair. 10 kids? With me? We barely know each other. We've worked together today, she said simply. I've seen your hands, your mind. You're capable. And I feel, she hesitated, a rare crack in her armor, then pressed on. I feel something when I'm near you. Something strong. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. He wasn't a guy who believed in love at first sight. Hell, he barely believed in love at all after a string of bad dates back on Earth. But this was insane. And yet, the way she looked at him, like he was the only thing in the universe worth seeing, stirred something deep inside him, something primal. Look, Liora, he said, forcing a shaky laugh. I'm flattered. Really, but 10 kids? I mean, I'm just a guy who fixes ships. I don't even know if humans in Clithera can. He stopped, realizing he didn't even know if it was possible. Her people were different, longer lives, glowing skin, who knew what else. Liora stepped closer, closing the gap between them. We can, she said, her voice a whisper now. And we will. My people don't settle for less. A strong family is our strength, our survival. One child is weakness. 10 is power. Ethan's throat went dry. Power, huh? You sound like you've already got this all planned out. She tilted her head, her golden hair spilling over one shoulder. I plan for what I want. And I want you, Ethan Parker. His heart slammed against his ribs. He should have backed away, made some excuse, called it a day. But he didn't. Instead, he held her gaze, caught in the pull of her certainty. You're crazy, he muttered, half to himself. Maybe, she replied, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. But you'll see. Before he could respond, an alarm blared through the hangar, sharp, insistent. Ethan jolted, spinning toward the sound. What the hell's that? Leora's eyes narrowed, her warrior instincts kicking in. Trouble, she said, grabbing a communicator from her belt. A voice crackled through. Commander Liora, we've got a breach. Unknown ship approaching fast. She cursed under her breath, then shot Ethan a look. Stay here. I'll handle it. No chance, he said, grabbing his toolbox. If something's broken, I'm coming with you. She hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But don't slow me down. Together, they raced toward the command deck, the station's lights flickering as the threat loomed closer. Ethan's mind spun, not just from the danger, but from her words. 10 kids. No negotiation. It was ridiculous, impossible, terrifying. And yet, as he ran beside her, feeling the heat of her presence, he couldn't shake the thought. What if she was right? What if this was the start of something bigger than he'd ever imagined? The station shook, a distant explosion rumbling through the hall. Liora grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. "Move," she barked. Ethan grinned, despite himself. "Guess we're in this together now." She didn't answer, but her grip tightened, and in that moment, he knew. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. The station's corridors vibrated with the echo of that first explosion, a low growl that set Ethan's teeth on edge. He sprinted alongside Liora, toolbox banging against his hip, the chaos around them sharpening his senses. Her golden hair streamed behind her like a comet's tail, her glowing skin casting faint light on the metallic walls. "What's attacking us?" he shouted over the blaring alarms. Leora's jaw tightened, her green eyes scanning ahead. "Pirates, maybe, or worse, someone who doesn't want us here." They burst onto the command deck, a wide, circular room buzzing with Clithera soldiers and human techs. Screens flickered with red warnings, showing a sleek, black ship closing in fast. Liora barked orders in her native tongue, sharp and melodic, while Ethan slid into a chair at a console. "Give me something to fix," he called. A Clithera tech shoved a tablet his way, schematics of the station's shields. "They're overloading. Can you reroute the power?" Ethan grinned. "Watch me." His fingers flew over the controls, rerouting circuits, bypassing fried relays. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he felt alive, thrumming with adrenaline and the thrill of working beside her. Liora glanced over, her expression unreadable, then turned back to her team. Minutes later, the shield stabilized, and a volley of plasma fire from the station sent the enemy ship retreating into the void. The room erupted in cheers, human and Clithera voices mingling. Ethan leaned back, catching his breath, and met Leora's gaze. "Not bad, huh?" She nodded, a rare softness in her eyes. "Not bad." That night, it didn't part ways. Under the pretense of debriefing, Liora led him to her quarters, a small, dimly lit space with a view of Earth's glowing curve. The air was warm, thick with the scent of something alien, sweet and sharp like ozone after a storm. She shed her commander's tunic, revealing a lighter shirt that clung to her frame, and Ethan's throat went dry. "So," he said, forcing casualness, "about that 10-kid thing. You were serious?" Liora sat across from him, legs crossed, her glow painting faint patterns on the floor. "Deadly serious. My people survived because we built strong families. One child is a risk. 10 is a legacy." Ethan rubbed his neck, laughing nervously. "A legacy? I'm just a guy who fixes engines, Liora. I don't even know if we're compatible." Her lips curved, a glint of challenge in her eyes. "We are. I've studied your biology. It's possible." He stared at her, caught between disbelief and a strange, tugging curiosity. "You've studied me?" "Not you," she said, leaning closer. "You're kind. But you, Ethan Parker, are different. You don't flinch under pressure. You laugh when you should panic." "I like that." Her words hung between them, heavy and electric. Before he could stop himself, he reached out, brushing a strand of her golden hair. It felt like silk under his fingers, and her breath hitched just for a second. Then she moved, fast, deliberate. She closed the distance and kissed him. Her lips were warm, fierce, tasting faintly of that alien sweetness. Ethan's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and the world melted away. Alarms, pirates, the station itself. It was just them, tangled in a heat he hadn't expected but couldn't resist. When they broke apart, breathless, he grinned. "Okay, maybe I'm warming up to your crazy ideas." She smirked. "Good, because I don't lose what I claim." What started that night didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Liora became inseparable. They worked together by day, him fixing ships, her commanding patrols, and spent nights in her quarters, trading stories under artificial starlight. He told her about Earth, about greasy diner food and rainy days. She spoke of Clithera's lost skies, of cities carved from crystal that crumbled under cosmic storms. The more they shared, the deeper he fell, hooked on her strength, her fire, the way she looked at him like he was more than just a mechanic. But it wasn't easy. Whispers spread through Station Nexus. Human crewmates shot Ethan dark looks, muttering about traitors and alien lovers. Clithera elders visited Liora, their voices low and stern, warning her that bonding with a human weakened their bloodline. Ethan shrugged it off. He'd never cared much for rules, but Liora's resolve hardened. They don't understand, she told him one night, her head resting on his chest. This isn't weakness. It's strength. Strength took on new meaning months later. They'd been repairing a shuttle together, Ethan elbow-deep in wiring, when he slipped on a slick patch of coolant. He fell hard, crashing into Liora, and his hands landed, accidentally but firmly, on her backside. The curve under his palms was solid yet soft, and he froze, heat rushing to his face. Sorry. Slippery floor, he stammered, pulling back. Liora laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down his spine. You're clumsy in the best ways, Ethan. I should keep you off balance more often. He smirked, brushing it off, but the moment lingered. Her laugh, her warmth, the way she didn't mind. Later that night, she pulled him close, her glow bathing the room in gold. I'm carrying your child, she whispered. Ethan blinked, brain short-circuiting. What? Already? She nodded, resting his hand on her abdomen. Beneath his fingers, a faint pulse of light flickered, barely there but real. His heart skipped, a mix of panic and awe flooding him. Holy hell, he breathed. We're really doing this. Word spread fast. Kai was born 9 months later, a tiny miracle with Ethan's dark hair and Liora's luminescent skin. His eyes, bright green with swirling flecks, were a perfect blend of them both. Ethan held him, marveling at the weight in his arms, the soft glow that pulsed with every breath. He's incredible, he said, voice thick. Liora smiled, exhausted but radiant. He's ours. The first of many. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You're still on that 10 thing, huh? Always, she replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. For a while it was perfect. Ethan adapted to fatherhood with a mix of trial and error, learning to soothe Kai's cries, laughing when the baby's glow lit up their quarters like a nightlight. Liora was a natural, her warrior's grace shifting seamlessly into motherhood. She sang to Kai in Clithera tongue, low and haunting, and Ethan found himself humming along, a bridge between their worlds forming in those quiet moments. But perfection didn't last. One evening, as Ethan rocked Kai to sleep, a message pinged on his comms unit. He opened it, expecting a work order, but the words chilled him. Stop breeding with that thing. Parker, or your freak spawn dies first. And signed, but the venom was clear. He showed it to Liora, expecting her to shrug it off. She was fearless, after all. Instead, her eyes darkened, her glow flaring briefly. Humans, she muttered. Some of them fear what they can't control. Ethan frowned, setting Kai in his crib. It's just a coward with a keyboard. They won't touch us. But Liora shook her head, pacing. You don't understand. On my world, threats like this came before the storms, before everything fell. We can't ignore it. He stepped closer, grabbing her shoulders. Hey, I'm not ignoring anything. I'll keep you both safe. Promise. She looked up at him, fierce and vulnerable all at once, and pulled him into a kiss, hard, desperate, her hands sliding up his back. Ethan responded, pressing himself against her, the heat of her body grounding him. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. We're in this together, right? Always, she whispered. The next day, Ethan dug in his station records, trying to trace the message. What he found wasn't random hate. It linked to a group called Dawn of Purity, humans obsessed with keeping Earth pure. They'd been watching him, watching Kai, and now they knew about Liora's pregnancy dreams. 10 kids wasn't just her vision, it was their nightmare. Ethan clenched his fists, a protective fire igniting in his chest. He'd never been a fighter, but for his family, he'd learn. As he returned to their quarters, Liora met him at the door, her glow dimmer than usual. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. She took his hand, guiding it to her stomach again. That faint light pulsed, stronger now. It's happening again, she said, her voice steady but her eyes searching his. Another child. Ethan's jaw dropped. Already? We got kind diapers. She smirked, a flicker of her old fire returning. No negotiation, remember? He laughed, a wild, helpless sound, and pulled her close. You're insane, you know that. And you love it, she shot back, her lips brushing his. He couldn't argue. Whatever came next, threats, kids, chaos, he was all in. Ethan stood in the dim glow of their quarters, staring at the comms unit as if it might bite. The message from Dawn of Purity still burned in his mind. Stop breeding with that thing. Where your freak spawn dies first. Beside him, Kai slept soundly in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling, a faint shimmer rippling across his skin with each breath. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He'd always been the guy who fixed problems. Engines, shields, anything with wires, but this was a threat he couldn't unscrew or rewire. Liora paced the room, her golden hair swaying, her glow flickering like a storm brewing beneath her skin. She'd barely spoken since he'd shown her the message, but the set of her jaw told him everything. We need to find them, she said finally, her voice low and sharp. Before they find us. Ethan nodded, stepping closer. I'm already on it. Trace the signal to a human outpost on the lower decks. Dawn of Purity. There's some kind of purist cult. They hate that we're us. Her green eyes flashed, meeting his. They fear what they don't understand. Kai is no freak. He's the future. Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it. I know. And now you're talking about another one? You're sure? She guided his fingers to her abdomen again. And there it was, that faint, pulsing light, stronger than before. A second child, already growing. Ethan exhaled, a mix of wonder and dread washing over him. Hell, Liora, we've barely got a handle on one. How are we supposed to? 10. She cut in, her tone unyielding. I told you, Ethan. No negotiation. He laughed, a ragged sound, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I remember. But this? With these nut jobs threatening us? It's insane. She stepped closer, her glow bathing his face in gold. Insane is letting fear stop us. My people survive by building, not hiding. This child, this family, is our strength. He wanted to argue, to point out the logistics, diapers, space, the fact that he was still figuring out how to be a dad to Kai. But her certainty stopped him cold. That fire in her eyes, the way she believed in them. In him, it was intoxicating. You're impossible, he muttered, pulling her into his arms. She pressed against him, her warmth seeping through his shirt, and for a moment, the threat faded. And you're stubborn, she whispered, her lips brushing his ear. That's why I chose you. The moment shattered when the station's lights flickered, a low hum vibrating through the walls. Ethan pulled back, frowning. What now? Leora's hand went to her comms unit, her expression hardening. Perimeter alert. Something's wrong. She grabbed her tunic, slipping it on with the grace of a warrior, and Ethan followed her out, heart pounding. They reached the command deck to find chaos. Clithera guards shouted over each other, screens flashing with warnings. A human tech, Jenkins, one of Ethan's old crew, rushed over. It's a sabotage signal, Parker. Someone's jamming our defenses from inside. Ethan's stomach dropped. Inside? You're sure? Jenkins nodded, pale. Yeah, and it's targeting your sector. Leora's glow flared, her voice cutting through the noise. Lock it down. Now. She turned to Ethan, eyes blazing. Dawn of Purity. They're closer than we thought. He cursed under his breath, already moving to a console. I'll trace it. If they're here, I'll find them. His fingers danced over the controls, pulling up station logs, cross-referencing signals. Liora stood beside him, directing her guards, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Minutes later, he had it, a faint transmission ping from the lower decks, near the human barracks. Gotcha, he muttered, showing Liora the data. She nodded, her jaw tight. We go together. I won't let them near Kai. Ethan hesitated, then grabbed his toolbox. Fine, but we're not rushing in blind. I've got a plan. They descended to the lower decks, the air growing colder, the hum of machinery louder. Ethan led the way, Liora a step behind, her glow dimmed to avoid attention. The barracks loomed ahead, a maze of corridors packed with human workers. He stopped at a junction, pulling out a handheld scanner. Signal's strong here. They're close. Liora's hand rested on her weapon, a sleek Clithra blade. Then we end this. Before they could move, a shadow shifted, a figure in a hooded jacket stepping from an alcove. Ethan tensed, but Liora reacted faster, lunging forward. The figure dodged, pulling a stun baton, and swung. Ethan dove in, tackling the attacker from his side. They crashed into a wall, the baton clattering away, and Ethan pinned the guy down, wrench in hand. "Who the hell are you?" he growled. The hood fell back, revealing a gaunt face. Human, mid-30s, eyes wild with hate. "You're a traitor, Parker," the man spat, mixing with that alien filth. "Dawn of purity will burn your little family to ash." Ethan's blood boiled. He pressed a wrench to the guy's throat, just enough to make him gasp. "Threaten my kid again, and you'll wish you'd stayed planetside." Liora pulled him off, her glow flaring. "Enough. We need him alive." She knelt, staring into the man's eyes. "Where are the others?" He sneered, but fear flickered in his gaze. "You'll see soon enough." She stood, nodding to Ethan. "Tie him up. We'll take him back." Ethan grabbed some cable from his toolbox, binding the guy's wrists but uneased gnawed at him. This wasn't over. Back on the command deck, they handed the prisoner to Clithra guards, but the victory felt hollow. Ethan slumped into a chair, rubbing his face. "One down. Who knows how many to go? And you're pregnant again, Liora. How do we keep doing this?" She sat beside him, her hand finding his. "We fight. Together." He looked at her, the weight of it all crashing down. Kai, the new baby, the hatred closing in. "I'm scared," he admitted, voice low. "Not the kids. Of losing you. Losing them." Her expression softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through her warrior's mask. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his, a Clithra gesture he'd come to love. "You won't lose us," she murmured. "I swear it." Then, as if to prove it, she kissed him, slow, deep, her hands sliding up his chest. Ethan melted into her, the fear easing just enough to breathe. But the moment didn't last. Later that night, back in their quarters, Liora sat on the bed, watching Kai sleep. Ethan joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then hesitated. "There's something I need to show you." She took his hand, pressing it to her stomach again. The light pulsed, brighter now, unmistakable. Ethan's eyes widened. "It's growing fast. Faster than Kai," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something new, uncertainty. Clithra pregnancies adapt. This one knows we're in danger. He stared at her, processing. "You're saying it's speeding up? Because of them?" She nodded. "It's our strength, Ethan. Our children will be ready for this fight." He exhaled, leaning back against the headboard. "Ready or not, we're in deep now." Then, needing to lighten the mood, he smirked. 10 kids, huh? You're still set on that." She turned, her glow catching the mischief in his eyes. "Always." Before he could reply, she shifted, leaning over him to adjust Kai's blanket. As she moved, her chest brushed against his arm, the softness pressing through her thin shirt. Ethan froze, heat rushing through him, his breath catching. Liora paused, glancing back with a sly smile. "Distracted?" she teased, her voice low. He swallowed, grinning despite himself. "You're doing that on purpose." She chuckled, settling beside him again. "Maybe. Keeps you on your toes." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You're trouble. You know that? And you love it." She shot back, her hand resting on his. The next morning, a new message arrived, harsher, colder. "2 freaks won't save you. We're coming." Ethan's stomach twisted, but Liora's grip tightened on his hand. "Let them come," she said, her glow flaring like a beacon. "We'll be ready." Ethan nodded, resolve hardening. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a father, a partner, and whatever dawn of purity threw at them, he'd fight. For her. For Kai. For the child already glowing inside her. But as he looked at Liora, fierce and unshaken, a question lingered. How many more threats could they face before something broke? The air in their quarters felt heavy, charged with the weight of that latest message. 2 freaks won't save you. We're coming. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the comms unit, his fingers tapping restlessly against his knee. Kai slept in his crib, oblivious, his soft glow a quiet comfort. Liora stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the endless black of space, her own light pulsing faintly. She hadn't spoken since they'd read the threat, but Ethan knew that silence. It was the calm before her storm. "We can't wait for them to hit us first," she said finally, turning to face him. Her green eyes burned, fierce and unyielding. "Dawn of purity want to fight. We give it to them." Ethan stood, crossing the room to her. "I'm all for fighting Liora, but we've got Kai. And this one." He nodded at her stomach, where that faint light still flickered, growing stronger every day. "We need a plan, not a brawl." She stepped closer, her glow casting shadows across his face. "The plan is simple. We find them, we stop them. My people don't cower." He grabbed her shoulders, his voice firm. "And I don't run. But we're not just soldiers, we're parents. We do this smart." For a moment, she bristled, her warrior instincts flaring, but then she nodded, a rare concession. Smart then, but fast. They didn't have to wait long. Hours later, the station's alarms screamed to life, shrill, relentless. Ethan jolted upright from the couch where he'd been dozing, toolbox still at his feet. Liora was already moving, pulling on her tunic, her blade gleaming at her hip. "They're here," she said, her voice cold steel. Ethan grabbed his comms unit, patching into the command deck. Jenkins' panicked voice crackled through. "Parker, it's bad. Armed group in the lower decks, human signatures. They're heading your way." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Kai," he breathed, rushing to the crib. The baby stirred, blinking up at him with those starry eyes. Liora was at his side in an instant, scooping Kai into her arms. "We need to move him. Somewhere safe." Ethan nodded, mind racing. "The engineering bay. It's locked down, defensible. I can rig the doors." She didn't argue, just followed him as they bolted out, Kai cradled against her chest. The corridors were a blur of flashing lights and shouting voices. Clithora guards clashed with human techs, some loyal, some turning traitor. Ethan led the way, ducking through side passages, his heart hammering. They reached the engineering bay, a cavernous room filled with machinery and tools. He slammed the door shut, hands flying over the control panel to override the lock. "That'll hold for now," he muttered, turning to Liora. She set Kai in a makeshift nest of blankets behind a workbench, her glow dimming as she scanned the room. "They'll come for him," she said. "I won't let them." Before Ethan could respond, the door shuttered, a heavy thud, then another. Voices barked outside, muffled but angry. "Open it, Parker! Give us the freak and the alien bitch." Ethan's fist clenched, rage boiling up. "Over my dead body," he growled, grabbing a wrench. Liora drew her blade, her stance shifting to that of a predator. "Stay back," she told him. "I'll handle this." He shook his head, stepping beside her. "Together, remember?" The door buckled, then blew inward with a deafening bang. Smoke billowed in, and 5 figures stormed through, humans in dark gear, armed with stun batons and pistols. Ethan recognized one, the gaunt man they'd caught before, now free, a sneer twisting his face. "Told you we'd come," he spat. Liora didn't wait. She lunged, her blade flashing. The first attacker went down, clutching his arm, but the others swarmed her. Ethan dove in, swinging his wrench. It cracked against a batten, the impact jarring his arm, but he held firm, shoving the guy back. The fight was chaos, grunts, metal clanging, the hum of Liora's blade slicing air. She moved like a force of nature, her glow flaring to blind her foes, but there were too many. A batten caught her shoulder, sending her staggering. Ethan roared, tackling the attacker, slamming him into a console. Pain shot through his ribs, but he didn't care. Kai's soft cries echoed behind him, fueling his fury. He glanced at Liora. She was back on her feet, blood trickling from her shoulder, her glow flickering. "Ethan!" she shouted, pointing. The gaunt man had slipped past, heading for Kai. Ethan spun, lunging just as the guy reached the workbench. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it hard, and threw him to the ground. "Don't touch my son," he snarled, pinning him with a knee. The man laughed, a sick, wheezing sound. Too late. He's gone. Ethan's heart stopped. He looked up. Kai was still there, safe, but the words chilled him. Then he heard it. A faint click, a hiss. Gas seeping from the vents. Liora's eyes widened. "They've rigged the air." She stumbled, clutching her side, her glow dimming fast. Ethan dragged the gaunt man up, slamming him against the wall. "What did you do?" The man grinned, coughing. "Sedative. You'll sleep. Then we take the kid." Panic surged. Ethan dropped him, rushing to Liora. She was swaying, her blade slipping from her hand. "Kai," she whispered, sinking to her knees. Ethan caught her, his own head spinning as the gas thickened. "Stay with me," he pleaded, shaking her. Her eyes fluttered, but she gripped his arm, weak but fierce. "Get him out." He stumbled to Kai, scooping the baby up. The room tilted, his legs heavy, but he forced himself to the console. Hands trembling, he punched in a code, rerouting the vents to flush the gas. The hiss faded, fresh air pumping in, but it was slow, too slow. Liora slumped against the workbench, her glow nearly gone. Ethan knelt beside her, Kai clutched to his chest, fighting the haze in his mind. "Don't you dare leave me," he growled, shaking her again. Her lips twitched, a faint smile. "Never." The last attackers fled, dragging their wounded, but Ethan barely noticed. He focused on Liora, on the faint rise of her chest. The gas cleared, and her glow flickered back, weak but steady. She opened her eyes, meeting his. "Huh," she rasped. Ethan held him up, relief crashing through him. "Safe. You're both safe." She nodded, struggling to sit. "Good." But they took him. Ethan frowned, confused, until he followed her gaze. The gaunt man was gone, escaped in the chaos. His stomach twisted. "They're not done," he said, voice grim. Liora gripped his hand, her strength returning. "Then we finish them. For our children." He looked at her, at Kai, at the light pulsing beneath her skin. "Yeah," he agreed, resolve hardening. "For all of them." Ethan crouched beside Liora, the engineering bay's silence ringing in his ears after the chaos. Kai whimpered softly in his arms, his tiny glow pulsing with unease, but he was safe for now. Liora leaned against the workbench, her breathing shallow, blood staining her shoulder where the baton had struck. Her glow was faint, flickering like a dying star, and it scared Ethan more than the fight ever had. "You're hurt," he said, voice rough. "We need to patch you up." She shook her head, wincing as she tried to stand. "I'm fine." "We have to know." He cut her off, setting Kai back in his blanket nest. "You're not fine. Sit." Her green eyes narrowed, defiance flaring, but she sank back down, too weak to argue. Ethan grabbed a medkit from a nearby shelf, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "Hold still," he muttered, kneeling in front of her. He tugged at her tunic, peeling it down her shoulder to expose the wound, a nasty bruise blooming purple against her luminous skin, blood trickling from shallow cut. She hissed as he dabbed it with antiseptic, her glow flaring briefly. "Easy," he said, softer now, his fingers brushing her collarbone. Then, as he reached for a bandage, his hand slipped, accidentally grazing across her chest. The soft curve beneath her thin undershirt pressed against his palm, warm and unexpected, and Ethan froze, heat rushing to his face. Leora's breath caught, her eyes locking onto his. For a heartbeat, neither moved, the air thick with tension. Then she smirked, a faint spark of her old fire returning. "Don't let your hands wander too far, Ethan," she murmured, her voice low and teasing. "Or I'll think you're after more than fixing me." He pulled back fast, stammering, "That wasn't on purpose. Just slippery fingers." She chuckled, a sound that eased the knot in his chest. "Sure it wasn't." He grinned despite himself, taping the bandage in place. You're impossible. You know that? And you're still here, she shot back, her hand brushing his as he worked. The touch lingered, grounding them both, and for a moment, the world shrank to just them. Her glow, his steady hands, the unspoken promise between them. But reality crashed back hard. The gaunt man's escape gnawed at Ethan, and Leora's injury was a stark reminder. Dawn of purity wasn't done. She shifted, testing her arm, then looked at him, serious again. They took Kai once. They'll try again. Ethan nodded, packing the medkit away. Yeah, and they know about this. He gestured to her stomach, where that second light pulsed, stronger now, a defiant little beacon. Leora's hand rested there, protective. They'll hate it even more, she said. 2 children, proof we're not stopping. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. 10, huh? You're still dead set on that. Her gaze softened, but her voice was steel. I told you, Ethan, no negotiation. This is who we are, what we build. He stared at her, the weight of it sinking in. Kai, this new life, the 8 more she dreamed of. It was madness, a future he couldn't fully grasp. And yet, you're bleeding, we're under attack, and you're still planning a damn dynasty, he said, half laughing. You're something else. She reached for him, her fingers curling around his wrist. And you're with me. That's why I fight for us. Her words hit him hard, cracking something open inside. He'd been scared. Hell, he still was. But seeing her like this, wounded yet unbroken, shifted everything. Okay, he said, voice low. But if we're doing this, 10 kids, the whole damn legacy, you gotta let me decide something too. Liora tilted her head, curious. What? He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers in that Clithera way she'd taught him. If they come again, we don't stop at surviving. We end them. For good. Her lips parted, surprise flickering in her eyes. Then she nodded, a slow, fierce smile spreading. Agreed. No merci. He kissed her then, hard, desperate, pouring every ounce of fear and resolve into it. She responded, her good arm sliding up his back, pulling him closer. Her glow flared, bathing them in gold, and Ethan felt it. They weren't just a couple anymore. They were a force, a family, something bigger than the hate chasing them. When they broke apart, breathless, he rested his head against hers. You drive me crazy, he whispered. Good, she replied, her voice a warm hum. Keeps you sharp. The station's comms crackled to life, Jenkins' voice cutting through. Parker, Liora, security's got the lower decks locked down. No sign of the bastards, but they've got footage. Looks like they're regrouping. Ethan cursed under his breath, standing. Regrouping means they're not done. Liora rose too, slower, her hand on her shoulder. Then we prepare. Next time, they don't leave. They move Kai to a safer spot. A locked storage unit with a vent patch by Ethan's quick fixes. He rigged a sensor to alert them if anyone got close, his engineer's mind racing ahead. Liora watched, her glow steadying, and when he finished, she grabbed his arm. You're good at this, she said, a note of pride in her voice. He smirked. Fixing stuff? It's what I do. No, she corrected. Protecting us. The compliment caught him off guard, warmth spreading through him. Well, you're the badass with the blade. I just keep up. She laughed, a rare, full sound, and it lit something in him, a flicker of hope amid the mess. But that hope dimmed fast. Hours later, as they sat planning their next move, Liora winced, clutching her side. Ethan was at her side in an instant. What's wrong? She took his hand, pressing it to her stomach again. The light pulsed, faster, brighter, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. It's moving, she said, her voice tight. More than it should. Ethan's eyes widened. What does that mean? Danger, she whispered. It senses it. Clithera, children adapt, grow stronger when we're threatened. He stared, awe and fear warring inside him. So it's fighting already? She nodded, her glow flaring briefly. For us. He sank back, overwhelmed. Hell, Liora, what are we making here? A future, she said simply, her hand squeezing his. One they can't take. Ethan looked at her, at Kai sleeping nearby, at the life glowing beneath her skin. He'd been a mechanic, a guy who fixed things. Now he was a father, a fighter, part of something insane and beautiful. All right, he said, resolve settling in. They want a war? They've got one. The station trembled, a distant rumble, a sign of trouble brewing. Liora stood, her blade in hand, her glow blazing now. They're back, she said, her voice a promise. Ethan grabbed his wrench, standing beside her. Then let's show them what happens when you mess with our family. Together, they faced the door, ready for the storm, their bond forged in blood and light, a force no one could break. The rumble shook Station Nexus again, a deep tremor that rattled the engineering bay's walls. Ethan tightened his grip on the wrench, standing shoulder to shoulder with Liora as the door loomed before them. Her blade gleamed in her hand, her glow blazing like a supernova, casting sharp shadows across the room. Kai slept in the locked storage unit behind them, his faint light a quiet pulse in the chaos. Ethan's heart pounded, not just from the threat, but from the fire in Leora's eyes, the unspoken vow they'd made. No one would take their family. They're here, Liora said, her voice steady, a warrior's calm. Ethan nodded, forcing a grin. Good. I'm tired of waiting. The door shuddered, then burst open with a screech of metal. Dawn of Purity stormed in. 10 of them this time, armed to the teeth, their faces twisted with hate. The gaunt man led them, a pistol in hand, his sneer cutting through the haze. Last chance, Parker, he barked. Hand over the freaks, or we burn this place down with you in it. Ethan stepped forward, wrench raised. You don't get it, do you? This is our home. You're the ones leaving in pieces. Liora moved beside him, her glow flaring so bright it stung the attacker's eyes. She didn't speak, just struck. Her blade sliced through the air, catching the first man's arm. He screamed, dropping his weapon, but the others charged. The fight was brutal, fast, a blur of fists and steel. Ethan swung his wrench, cracking it against a batten, then ducked a wild punch. He wasn't a soldier, but rage made him fierce. Every blow was for Kai, for Liora, for the child growing inside her. Liora fought like a tempest, her blade a silver streak, her glow disorienting their foes. But they were outnumbered, and the gaunt man hung back, aiming his pistol. A shot rang out. Ethan shouted as Liora staggered, blood blooming on her thigh. She didn't fall, just gritted her teeth and slashed down another attacker. Keep going, she yelled, her voice raw. Ethan lunged at the gaunt man, tackling him before he could fire again. They hit the ground hard, the pistol skittering away. You're done, Ethan snarled, slamming the wrench into the man's shoulder. The crack of bone echoed, and the guy howled, clawing at him. Liora finished the last of the others, her blade dripping red, her glow flickering with exhaustion. Ethan pinned the gaunt man, wrench pressed to his throat. Call it off, he growled. Now! The man laughed, a wet, choking sound. Too late. Reinforcements are all ready. A klaxon blared, cutting him off. The station's comms crackled. Security breach contained. Clithora forces inbound. Ethan glanced at Liora, relief flickering. Looks like your backup's out of luck. She limped over, her blade at the man's neck. End this, she said, her voice ice. He glared up at her, defiant, but fear crept into his eyes. You'll never belong here, he spat. Liora pressed the blade closer, a thin line of blood welling. We already do. Ethan pulled her back, shaking his head. He's not worth it. Let security deal with him. She hesitated, then stepped away, her glow steadying. Guards burst in moments later, dragging the gaunt man and his crew away in cuffs. Ethan caught Liora as she swayed, her strength finally giving out. You're a mess, he said, easing her to the floor. She smirked, wincing. So are you. He laughed, a shaky sound, and checked on Kai, still safe, still glowing. The fight was over, but the cost lingered in Leora's blood-streaked skin, in the ache in his ribs. We need a medic, he muttered, patching her leg with what was left of the medkit. Days later, the station settled into an uneasy calm. Dawn of Purity's remnants were rooted out, their leaders exposed as a rogue faction of human purists. Ethan and Liora faced interrogations, Clithera elders demanding answers, human officials eyeing them warily. But they stood together, unapologetic. Our children aren't threats, Ethan told them, his voice firm. They're bridges. You'll see. Liora squeezed his hand, her glow a quiet defiance. The second child came faster than they'd expected. Liora's adaptive biology, sped up by danger, brought Mira into the world just weeks after the fight. Ethan stood by her bedside in the med bay, awestruck as she cradled their daughter. Mira was small, dark-haired like him, but her eyes opened to reveal that same cosmic swirl, green and gold, a universe in miniature. Her skin shimmered faintly, softer than Kai's, a perfect blend of human and Clithera. She's beautiful, he whispered, brushing a finger over her tiny hand. Liora smiled, tired but radiant. She's ours. Kai toddled over, curious, his glow brightening as he reached for his sister. The moment their hands touched, a spark flared, a thin thread of light connecting them, pulsing once, then fading. Ethan's jaw dropped. What was that? Liora inhaled sharply, her eyes wide. I don't know. Something new. He looked at her, then at their children, a chill of wonder running through him. They're different, aren't they? More than we thought. She nodded, her voice soft. More than anyone thought. The discovery shifted everything. Scientists, human and Clithera, swarmed them, eager to study Mira and Kai. Theories flew. Latent abilities, a genetic leap, a key to peace or power. Ethan hated the scrutiny, but Liora faced it head-on. Let them look, she told him one night, Mira nursing at her chest. They'll see what we've built, something stronger than hate. He sat beside her, Kai asleep in his lap, and watched the glow of their family fill the room. You're right, he said, kissing her forehead. Always are. She smirked, leaning into him. Not always. You were right about fighting smart. He chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. Guess we're a good team, huh? She rested her head on his shoulder, her glow warm against his skin. The best. Weeks passed, and the station adapted. Dawn of Purity's collapse left scars. Distrust lingered. Whispers of freaks still floated, but Ethan and Liora refused to hide. They walked the corridors together, Kai at their side, Mira in a sling against Liora's chest. People stared, some with awe, others with unease, but the family's light was undeniable, a beacon of what could be. One night, as Ethan rocked Mira to sleep, her tiny glow flickering with each breath, he looked at Liora across the room. She sat on the bed, brushing Kai's hair, her own light steady now, no longer dimmed by battle. You know, he said quietly, I used to think 10 was crazy. Too much. She glanced up, a playful glint in her eyes. And now, he smiled, looking down at Mira, then at Kai, feeling the weight of their future. Now I get it. It's not about the number. It's about this. Us. What we're making. Her smile widened, a rare softness breaking through her warrior's edge. Took you long enough. He laughed, setting Mira in her crib, and crossed to Liora, pulling her onto the bed beside him. She leaned in, her chest brushing his arm as she adjusted her position, a soft, accidental press that sent a familiar jolt through him. He froze, heat rising, and she caught his look, smirking. Still distracted by that, she teased, her voice low. He grinned, pulling her closer. Always. Guess I'll have to get used to it with 8 more on the way. She laughed a victorious sound and kissed him, slow, deep, her glow flaring around them. No negotiation, my love, she murmured against his lips. I wouldn't dare, he replied, kissing her back, their children's light mingling with theirs. The station hummed around them, a fragile peace holding, but Ethan knew this was just the beginning. Dawn of Purity was gone, but others might rise. Fear was stubborn that way. Yet as he lay there, Liora in his arms, Kai and Mira nearby, he felt it. Their love wasn't just survival. It was infinite, a force that could reshape worlds. Outside, Earth glowed through the window, a blue marble against the void. Inside, their home pulsed with laughter, light, and the promise of more. A family not just existing, but thriving. 10 might not be enough, he whispered, half joking. Liora's eyes sparkled. Then let the universe decide. And with that, they faced the future together, unbreakable, their legacy already shining brighter than the stars.